Jonathan, let me start with you. I know you've spoken before about the situation that you grew up in, but for people who aren't aware, just take us through what your childhood was like in regards to your dad and his drinking.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in with my dad. My parents divorced because of the drinking, and I'd spend my time between my mum's place and my dad's. But when I was with my dad, he was just drunk all the time. He would go to the corner shop, buy these big bottles of white wine. The fridge was just full up of these big bottles of white wine, and I'm an only child, so it was just me and my dad in the house, and I was like dealing with a drunk sort of 40-year-old throughout, as it were, throughout all my childhood. I remember him when I was a bit younger coming to the school to get me and falling over because he'd been in the pub all day. Uh, I mean, every aspect of my life was coloured by his drinking, but uh, I was actually quite fortunate though because he was never abusive. He was never violent. That can happen to lots of other children in this situation. He was, if you like, a very sort of happy drunk,
Mm.
and his friends would think he was hilarious and good fun, and and all that. But if you're the son dealing with it, it's quite sort of it's tedious, it's upsetting, and obviously when you become a teenager, um, you become really upset about it because you're asking yourself, why are you trapped in a house with this drinking going on all the time? And I've just always wanted in this role now as the Shadow Health Secretary to do something to support those children in a similar circumstance. And because, as I say, I was lucky. He
Mm.
was never violent. There was never anything like that. But it was just constant drunkenness. And I had to grow up pretty quickly, to be honest. I had to grow up because a lot of the time I was doing the things that the parents should do, going to the shop, getting the food, cooking the tea, that kind of thing. And there are a lot of children in this situation, and it's going to be worse because of the lockdown.
Yes, absolutely. Josh Connolly, as I said, you're now an ambassador for the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. Your story's slightly different in that you were 9 when your dad died as a result of alcohol. What was your life up until 9 like?
Well, look, my dad was quite a violent, angry, chaotic man who, to be honest with you, scared me when he was drunk and scared me when he was sober. I think for a long time it was just my normal. I didn't really know that what I was experiencing at home was different to any other household. Um, but I think for a lot of it, I turned it inwards. And I know sort of Jonathan has talked about being lucky that his dad wasn't perhaps as violent as my dad, but some of the most lasting damage that I felt as a result of my dad's drinking was always questioning whether I was good enough and
Mm.
whether I was lovable, and the ways that I abandoned myself to try and fit into the system that I existed in with my dad drinking. And I spent a lot of time upstairs in those real sort of initial years because it was quite frightening downstairs. But as I say, as a child, you adapt to that situation. And for me, what that meant was picking up lots of unhealthy coping mechanisms that later in my life stopped serving me in the way that they may have done in that environment that I existed in.
Yeah, and the other difference in your story and Jonathan's is that it kind of transferred to you in that you went on to become an alcoholic yourself. But I know that you are now how many years sober? 9,
Nearly 9 years sober, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, what was your mum around at this when you were growing up with your dad?
Yeah, so my mum was there. She split up with my dad when we were quite young. But of course, when somebody drinks in the way that my dad does, he doesn't just amicably disappear. He
Mm.
shows up a lot when he's been drinking. And I think what happens is because of the shame that surrounded this illness, is there was no help and support. And rather than kind of being able to express the struggle that we were all going through, my mum had her own panic and would have to try and downplay through the fear of what people might think and whether she might have her children taken off of her if they found out the way that my dad was. So when it's steeped in shame like that, and you can't kind of reach out and ask for support like you may be able to with less stigmatized struggles,
Mm.
we had, as a family, we all canoodled to try and keep the secret.
Yeah. Um, Jonathan, the other difference between your and Josh's story and children who are going through this now, of course, is that they can't get away. They can't have a breather. They can't, go to the park, play with their friends. They can't even go to school. That must be really, really tough now. You must think quite often about children who must be stuck, literally stuck, trapped in this situation right now.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely terrified when I really think it through. There's been all kinds of surveys who've come out in these last 12 months about which report increased drinking, parents experiencing more mental health problems, increased prescriptions for antidepressants and things like that. I mean, clearly these lockdowns are having a huge impact on people's mental health. And that will mean if the parents are drinking more, there will be children who are really exposed, really vulnerable. And of course, they're not going to school. The health visitors or the social workers will not be doing home visits as well. So a lot of the institutions, if you like, that will spot problems are just not there. And I'm really worried about the situation that children are facing, and I'm just worried that we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, because we know. I mean, look, we know if you grow up with a parent who abuses drink or abuses drugs or has got a gambling problem, you're more likely yourself to pick up those addictions yourself or develop mental health problems later in life. I mean, I became a politician. I'll leave your listeners to judge how that impacted me, But I'm just really worried that it's going to be a generation of children who are going to develop serious issues and problems, and we are not, because of the lockdown, because we're not supporting children at the moment, and we're going to have to pick that up as a society.
Would some of those children, if their home situation was known, would some of them be classed as vulnerable, and would some of them be in school right now anyway? I mean, that's not a kind of silver bullet, but would that be the case? Would that help, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, because if I think about my circumstances, it was a working class home. My dad was a croupier in a casino. I actually divorced my mum, but they actually met my mum because she was a bunny girl in the Playboy casino when the Playboy used to have casinos in this country. Yeah, I mean, so we're talking about a kind of 1970s lifestyle of in Manchester casinos of sort of Manchester United footballers coming along in and all that kind of stuff. So outwardly they had work. I mean, it was low paid working class jobs, but it was work. And my circumstances, well, they never were picked up by schools. I mean, I remember ringing at one point, trying to ring Childline, couldn't get through, and then I gave up on it. But one of the things that I've worked on with Josh and the organisation that Josh is the ambassador for, NACOA, is that getting funding in place. So there are phone lines, there are support mechanisms out there, and I've actually ran 3 London marathons now for NACOA, and I'm probably going to run a 4th one if we're ever allowed to run marathons again to raise money, because we do need support mechanisms out there.
Yeah, and just finally, Josh, if I come back to you, as I say, you're an ambassador for the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. Is there a single thing that if you could ask the government to prioritise in some way, so that children who are going through this right now have some kind of support? What would that be?
Look, NACOA has existed for 30 years and kind of knows the best ways to be able to support these children. We've learned from everything that we've learned over those 30 years, and calls are up 40% in the last year. We've had 4 times more 12 to 28-year-olds calling the helpline, many of whom have never spoke to anyone about their struggles before in their life. So funding for services like NACOA, so that these children can be made aware that, first, what they're experiencing is not normal, and secondly, can find some relief and some release from what they're experiencing by using our helpline, and furthermore to help charities like NACOA to educate teachers and anybody that may interact with children to know the signs of what these children may show up like, because it's not always what we may think. And often we look very normal
Mm.
on the outside, but at home we're desperately struggling. So I think that would be the main thing that I would say.
Okay, Josh, good to talk to you. That is Josh Connolly, who is an ambassador for the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. Been going for 30 years, that organisation. And we also heard from Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth.